him off a vacation to throw the strap on him.
It
And
seems like he's
really good at throwing. He's really good at putting shish kebab skewers in his head, though.
but so they're saying that he's the backbone of AEW, and right now he's got this storyline going on. It was with Bryan Daniels, but they pretty much laid him out. I forgot Roderick Strong, I think is who he wrestled this past weekend. I want to say it was Roderick Strong. I might be wrong on that, but they're saying that he's the backbone of AEW. You know, I would have said it could have been the Thigh Slappers or it could have been Kenny Omega because those are the executives of AEW. You would think it would be the executives that would be your backbone, but that kind of plays off of what I said last week when Kenny Omega announced that he was returning to wrestling, but not to AEW, as you would think, since that's his company that he helped start and that he's an executive of, that he's going over to New Japan and having his coming back, wrestling match.
Well, so what do you guys think of somebody, well, we'll just say Tony Khan, naming a single wrestler as the backbone? Does that alienate everybody else, piss them off, going to make them move? Or is it just a storyline to get them pissed to cause title shots in the commission?
You're going to have 50 different personalities in that locker room. Some are going to be like, I want to work up to that. Some are going to look to him for advice. And some are just going to be, like you said, just pissed off.
Right.
You're going to have a big mixture of all the above.
I just personally would think that you would have your executives as the backbone. Those should be the guys that you would lean to in cases of emergencies or in cases of. But then again, they were suspended during the whole CM Punk stuff. All three of them kind of get injured quite a bit, which puts them on the shelves. So I'm kind of with you where you would think Chris Jericho would be one of them because he's the one that I think put them on the map. Besides Cody Rhodes, but he's no longer there.
So well, that's what the people. Jericho reinvents himself time and time again, and it somehow always gets over. Like, no matter what they want to do, he does something new and gets it over. And someone that's been in the business as long as him, he's got every young guy there looking up to him.
Right. And he's not even a full-time player because he still does his band. He's the lead singer of that band. And then they got the cruise that they all take time out of and does.
I know. When you and I were talking about this earlier, I still think it's another misstep of Tony. I really do.
I think so too. Because look at our locker room. Our locker room have got people that I would say that are the backbone. The Gary Jackson, unfortunately, the Attila Khan. People with over 15, 20 years in the business. I've held that belt for over 500 days. I've got 20 plus years in the business. I coach and teach the new students that are currently building our card right now. Brandon Beretta, Joey, unfortunately, Glenn, but Jaquan. Those are people that come from our Ace Academy and growing into becoming single wrestlers or even tag team champions as Joey and Brandon have become. So, I think it's a lot of people that create the backbone. You just can't put it on one person's shoulders. Because if you do that and that person gets hurt, then what you going to do? So you
got a broken back.
Right. You need a bunch of 10-year wrestlers, or in his case, employees or something like that to carry the load, not just one person. And again, I would be pissed if someone just would name one person that carries the load in SICW, because a lot of us do a lot more behind the scenes than some, so. But yeah, so I just wanted to throw that out. It was an AEW thing that came out today, actually, I think is when I seen it. I'm going to switch to another thing, kind of WWE related, and I think this will be the last thing we talk about. I love podcasts. I talk about podcasts all the time. Besides the local podcasts, I love listening to Arn Anderson's podcast. I love listening to Jeff Jarrett's podcast. Jim Ross has a podcast I've been listening to for years. The Undertaker is a new person who's really new to the podcast, and his stories are new to us, the behind the scenes stories, because this is a man who never really talks about his legendary career.
I found that.
But so this week's podcast, he had a little person on there, Hornswoggle. That's trying to think of his name or a proper way to say it.
No, we're not PC or woke here, so you can say it any way you want.
Well, I don't want people to find out where I live and burn my house down. No, I'm just saying. Besides that, they're all busy this time of year, right?
They are.
And if you guys want his address, I'll give it to you.
And I love Hornswoggle. I've met him before. He's a great guy, and he just happens to be on the podcast. But this part that I want to talk about, he has nothing really to do about it. But if you're searching for the Undertaker's podcast, it's the one with Hornswoggle as the guest. Everyone talks about the Undertaker and his WrestleMania streak and how it was finally broken. Whether it was supposed to be or not, that's unclear. Because if you talk to one person, there was no way Brock wasn't going to win. If you talk to another person, the Undertaker should have won. But everyone who follows wrestling knows that the Undertaker had a concussion about midway through that match. And on his podcast, this is the first time I've heard him dabble in conversations about the concussion, but this is the first time that he talked about this concussion, probably a good 40 minutes in this podcast. So it's a very good one to listen to, and I say that because I too have suffered many concussions, and I blame a lot of stuff on that as well, because my memory is not quick as it used to be, and the details that I used to know starting to slip. But he talks about it.
Elephant memory to a hummingbird memory.
So he talks about it, and this is coming off of WWE just did a thing about concussions. It was actually, I think, on the Vince McMahon documentary on Netflix that they kind of brought that up. Because they touched base a little bit with the Chris Benoit, suicide murder type case. They just dabbled in it a little bit, and there was a lot of wrestlers like Stone Cold that said he doesn't believe in them, and he doesn't believe in during the research on a CT scan or anything like that. But the Undertaker,
he didn't believe in broken neck either, but he got to.
Well, the Undertaker, broke it down and how he still don't remember the whole match. As a matter of fact, he doesn't remember the match at all. He even says that. And he can only recite some of the match now that he's watched it back so many times. And he said he can't even pinpoint where he got the concussion at, which part of the match. But he said towards the end of the match, you can definitely see that he's moving a lot slower. He's not moving in the same pace that he normally does, and he doesn't do the moves that he normally does. Like every one of us wrestlers, we have, in some cases, Bobby likes to mix his up, so you never know what he's doing. But most of the time, we have like combos that we hit. It could be, like Hulk Hogan's. It's the punches, it's the big boot, it's the leg drop, that goes in a combo to get him the victory. Well, he said that he's doing shit that he normally doesn't do, or in the wrong order that he normally does it. So he knew he was concussed. So he talks about he had to do an impact test. Besides the regular protocol, this was another test that this doctor that he was going to does. And it kind of shows like your memory. It shows like current stuff. Like most of the time, whenever you get knocked out, they always ask you, who's the president of the United States? What year is it? So it's that kind of test. It's like a memory test of current facts, or a test that has some basic knowledge thrown into it. But this doctor also does for the football team, a particular football team, which would be the Steelers. And he talked about how when he was in the hospital, he couldn't remember anything from the match, didn't know anything. He said the last thing he remembers was talking to his wife, telling her some stuff before he was headed to the show. And that he doesn't remember the whole night. He doesn't remember talking to Brock Lesnar, before the show, during the match, or anything like that. He doesn't remember. He does remember seeing Brock and Vince McMahon at the hospital when he was like coming to and coming back to things. Because the doctor said that the concussion that he had was literally like a lamp. And he says it in the podcast. It's like you have a lamp that's on, and all of a sudden you unplug it. And this is like a total blank. And then you plug it back in, and then you start getting brighter again, and eventually you're kind of back to yourself. And he said it was almost about a year. He said it was almost about time for the next WrestleMania to come around before he was actually, and he wouldn't say 100%, but almost back to normal. And that he had to take another test to actually clear him from the concussion protocol. And he said on this test, he scored 85% higher than anyone in the Steelers camp. So that's kind of showing you how dramatic football is to players. So I know your sons, Bobby, do sports and do football, but that's something to think about too. That the concussions happen so much. There ain't a word for worser, but they're worse than some wrestling, I guess you would say.
Well, I can tell you, every time I had a concussion, it was preceded by a flashlight or a big bright light flash. So that burnt my bulb out.
Yeah. And I tell you about mine when it was. I don't even remember. All I remember is Gary was in the ring, but I do remember it was a tag match, and I do remember suplexing Gary, and his head hitting the mat, coming off, and hitting my head. And then I remember later on coming to in the match, and they're still, dancing around in the match when I come to, and I kind of get my balance back and figure out where we are in the match, and I just made it through it. I couldn't tell you if it was planned out the way me and my tag partner had planned or hoped for, but that was definitely my worst one that I had. But they were also Hornswoggle was talking about the Miz versus John Cena at WrestleMania 2, because the Miz had a WrestleMania moment, and he had never had one, and this was his first time kind of headlining WrestleMania, and it was against John Cena, which was Mr. WWE basically for the longest time, and he beat John Cena, but doesn't remember it, and he hasn't had a WrestleMania moment since. So his only one that he got, he won, beat Mr. WWE, but does not remember having the match. And So they just kept talking about how concussions are real. They didn't bring up the Crispin Wall thing, but in that documentary, they did, and they talk about how Crispin Wall had a brain of like an 80-year-old. That's how bad his brain was. That he surely should have had memory loss, and there was another
Well, I
thing.
think for Chris, they declared that one a traumatic brain injury, not just a concussion.
Well, see, that's the thing. It wasn't it was concussions over a long period of time that got him to that bad of a brain. It wasn't just one. I mean, his finisher was a diving headbutt. So who knows how many times? Because everyone that learned that from Harley Race, that's the first thing I told one of my students that wanted to do it is you are going to have a broken neck eventually. Attila Khan, trained by Harley Race, broken neck. Steve Fender, trained by Harley Race, broken neck. So those diving headbutts, besides having concussions, you're going to have could get a broken neck. Could finish your career. So I guess I wasn't going to talk about this match, but it kind of leads me into it because I almost want to say that the wrestling nowadays is kind of worse than like the 80s and the 90s, even the 2000s, because there was a match and everyone talks about how great this match was. And off air, I'll talk about it again, a different way. But on air, I'm going to say that everyone talks about how great this match was. And it was over the weekend. It was on AEW. It was their
I was
big
going to say
pay-per-view.
that's that match you and I were talking about.
Right. So I'm going to flip it just a little bit on this one. So Kyle Fletcher, I think is his name, went against Will Ospreay. And it was, the best way to explain it was an acrobat match.
Gymnastics.
Yeah, right. And they were doing spots after spots after spots, and just amazing. Don't get me wrong, amazing shit that I would never be able to do. But in theory, when you're talking about injuries and concussions and stuff like that, is it worth doing a whole 15-minute match full of that shit and possibly get hurt? Because every wrestler talks about a bump card. You only have so many bump cards before you got to get out of the business, or you get hurt. So nowadays, everyone's doing this kind of a match where they're doing so many spots. In one spot, speaking of The Undertaker, Kyle tombstoned Ocean Spray. Yeah, Osprey. I always think of, every time I hear it, I always think of Ocean Spray. But did a tombstone on the steel steps going up to the ring. Did a tombstone, and that wasn't even the finish for that match. Kind of crazy. A lot of people don't even do tombstones anymore. Like WWE, you can't do a tombstone unless you're Kane or The Undertaker. Because for a while there, everyone that was doing some sort of tombstone or pile driver was getting hurt. So they banned it, except for those two, because they were proficient at it. They were good giving it. They weren't trying to kill their opponent. But so they had what everyone's calling a banger of a match because they had so many spots, and no one knows who this Kyle Fletcher. I might be butchering his last name. They said that he was someone who was just there, wasn't really a big name, but Will made him into a big name because he took all, and he was able to go one-on-one with Will, and then Will lost, so the other guy got the pin. But I guess the point that I'm trying to say is it worth doing a match, doing 15 spots, knowing that your bump card is being used, and at any given time you can get hurt and you're done.
Or we can use psychology, do half the work and get twice the benefit.
Right.
Well, it's like I was saying earlier. It's another mistake by Tony. All flash, no substance. And that's a problem. And that's why last week we talked about part of AEW's decline.
And I agree. At least WWE has some sort of storyline going with most of their wrestlers. And it's a storyline that keeps building and was probably a year long. Like, Stephen E versus Herb Simmons. That went almost a year. Where Tony Khan, and me and you had talked about this, Nate, before we went on air. Tony Khan is a fan of wrestling. So he makes a lot of fan matches where, like I said, they picked this guy. No one knew a lot about him. Put him against Will. Yes, it was a banger of a match. Where's it going to go from here, though?
You can't go anywhere. It's one and done.
Yeah, and that's probably what's going to happen. Is just
Ospreay goes down the card now that he lost to him, right?
It ruins everything. A one hit for what? No benefit. Yeah, people are talking about that match, but can they do it again? Would they do it again? I mean, I don't understand where Tony was coming from with it. Yeah, he was a fan getting into it, but sometimes fans shouldn't own the promotion. If they want to own it, pass it to people who can actually write the storyline and provide a match that is universally liked, I guess.
What my thing is even if they do it again, how are they going to top it? Because if you got all these spots, you did a tombstone on the steel steps on the outside of the ring, and that didn't even finish the match. What are you going to do to top that in your next match? You're going to add some other stupid, crazy bump that, again, could get you hurt. And, again, we talked about this. Even current wrestlers, unless you're the number one or number two guy, you don't have health insurance. You don't have... this guy was pretty much an unknown, and if he would have got hurt, that's the only thing we would know about him. Because he wasn't in the main event for 6 years, building up all his millions of money. This is a guy that got plucked. Great worker, from that match. He can do all the shit. But if he's only able to do it once because he gets hurt from doing the shit, well, he ain't got nothing saved. So where you go?
Well, he better sign up for the Cauliflower Alley Club then. Because that would be his only recourse.
Right. Plug, Cauliflower Alley. But yeah, so I just wanted to end on that. And if any wrestlers are watching this, keep that in mind. We talked about last week the different finishers that is hardly used anymore because they're just common now. If they are used, it's just used as a common move, not really a finisher anymore. But just like we've seen this past weekend, a version of a sleeper hold can still finish the match, and that match is going to get talked about, since Herb is running this business forever, and it's going to be forever talked about through us from the podcast, because this is what saved the podcast. Because our backbone is SICW. Our backbone of our matches that we promote, whether it be the Wrestling at the Chase or the SICW, is all owned by SICW. So if Stephen E would have won, who knows, we probably would have had to go to more of a boxing or of a UFC style. Not that we won't throw that in there from here on then, but our backbone is...
We have friends in other
SICW
branches of combat sports, but I'm sure the people who own this podcast would have tried to create an agreement with Stephen E. And then try to steal it back from him.
You never know, because like I said, the first person they said they were going to fire was Gary Jackson, me, Drew. So who knows? But we don't have to think that way. But like I said, it was just the future wrestlers are wrestling this, and the people at the Ace Academy know because I preach it. Just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it. Because if it's a career-ending injury that you get from it, was it worth it?
And that's what I say about marriage. Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Right. People like Harley Race and the Briscoes and the Funks. I tell a tale about the Funks, Terry Funk. Actually, I think it was his brother, Dory, that had a match. The whole match was nothing but headlocks, headlock takeovers, getting back into the headlock, trying to squeeze that head like it's a pimple until you can get them to fucking tap out by it. Simple moves can get the shit done. And prolongs your wrestling life, prolongs your body, prolongs your career. So I don't know. Some people like it. Some people don't like the new stuff. I'm a little leery about it. Sometimes I might see something cool that I might like, holy shit, but that should have been the finish. Type of thing. Don't get me wrong. I love the people like Ricochet who can do all that stuff. But sometimes you got to wonder how long you can go by keep doing that stuff. Like Mick Foley, his big claim to fame was that Hell in a Cell match where he got thrown off the Hell in a Cell cage. But he wasn't really right after that. He couldn't really wrestle as great as he used to after that. So just keep that in mind. But I do want to say a couple things. Freaking awesome. We've gained so many subscribers in the last month. We are now over the 500. We were trying to get over 500 for the longest time, probably at least 6 months. And this last month alone jumped us over the 500. We're sitting at 506 before this started tonight. So we reached one step closer. We want to monetize this if we can. Yard sale.
Your toys.
Oh, well, yeah, I'll get to that. All right. It wasn't a yard sale, though. But yeah, so we're getting a step closer. We're 506. We would love to get to a grand next. 500 is great. We need some more people watching the product, though, to get some more time in. So that would be great if you could still share it. It'll help us out, get more time hours watched, get more subscribers. We got to talk a little later about possibly opening up a store on our YouTube channel. Trying to get some product going, some Squared Ring Podcast t-shirts, maybe some collared shirts, and definitely
a place
some other
where Jim can sell his extras.
Possibly. Bobby has got an online store already. Maybe he can still tag that into it as well. Because I think we have to have we can go that way, having like a secondary outlet that could go from our store to that one to get it made and sent out. But a whole bunch of possibilities now that we have the 500 subscribers. So I just, again, want to thank you. And a lot of people this Saturday come up to me and Nate talking about the podcast and how they enjoy it and how they are starting to recommend some matches that they weren't able to see live or maybe seen it live but want to see it again. So Nate put out one today on Lilith Khan because it was a fan wanted to see it. So we obliged, or Nate obliged to it. So that's
it's actually an ACW fan of the Searchers. He wanted to see Miss Hyde, the Searcher's daughter, wrestling Lilith. So there you
go. Thank you, guys. So before we go, I'll just do it real quick. last week was my birthday, and I told you I was going to grab some stuff or give him some stuff. So I kind of hit all bases. I always talked about the LJNs. I got 2 LJNs this week. Is the British Bulldogs, Davy Boy Smith and Dynamite Kid. So these are cool. I never had these as a kid. These are kind of like 2 of the harder ones to find. Probably in the spectrum of things, like Haku's figure is like one of the rarest. Ultimate Warrior is one of the rarest. This is like up there, but not quite. So I would say these are like the medium ones to find. The most common one would be like the Hulk Hogan. Everyone wanted a Hulk Hogan, so they made a lot of Hulk Hogans. They back in the 80s, they did push the tag teams a lot. So, they had these 2. They have the Hart Foundation, which, Bret Hart and Anvil, which is another hard tag team to find. I hit up some not AEW, now I can't even think of it. And oh my God, this is why you don't play with chairs, kids. Chairs hurt.
AWA.
AWA. God damn it. Thank you, Bobby. This is Jerry Blackwell. Someone you would also call him Jerry. Crusher Blackwell. But his name is Jerry. Now, none of these have. They have outfits. I just don't have them with it because they are much cheaper to find with nothing. And they have different coats, or in this case, Stan Hansen. This is an awesome one because I have his newest figure from Greg Gagne's toy group. If I had it in front of me, I would be able to tell you what the toy group is. But it's also the one that just put out the Bruiser Brody and the Kerry Von Erich. But this is like the first Stan Hansen one. And it would have normally had like his vest, his chaps, and his cowboy hat. Those ones, run from $60 to $70. But I got this one just how it is, which is still pretty minty. There's no really blemish or anything on them. I think I paid $12 for it. So it's pretty cheap when you don't have the accessories. But until I can get one with the accessories, this will be a nice stand-in for that. And I didn't really have any of these growing up because I was a WWF kid. But speaking of WWF, so I hit the Hasbro line as well. This is IRS. He used to team with $1 Million Man. He's also, what was his actual name in WCW?
Mike Rotunda.
Yeah, Rotunda. That's why I want to. Glad you could remember because I was trying to remember it before the podcast and I did, but I forgot it since then. He's related to Barry Windham, which is related to all the Windham kids. So you have Bo Dallas, and you have Bo's older brother who just passed away not too long ago, which his name escapes me now too.
Bray Wyatt.
Yeah, thank you. So I kind of hit all 3 categories: the AWA, the WWF LJNs, and then the WWF Hasbro. So that's awesome to me. I got another one on the way. That's I showed you guys like the 12-inch Ultimate Warrior. That's a pull string that talks. Well, this will be the Hulk Hogan version, and they only made 2. They only made the Ultimate Warrior and the Hulk Hogan. So he'll be coming shortly. I'll show him next week. But yeah, awesome things. I really love those. And it's so weird because as soon as I get them, I clean them up and put them in the case and then, kind of walk away. It's something I don't buy them to play with or anything like that. I don't give it to my grandkids. They do love walking up to the cases and looking at all the wrestlers because they all love wrestling. And then I got to pull them all out of the cases to show you guys. And then after this, I'll put them right back so they don't get fucked up.
But at least you get to touch them again.
Right. And I say that because they got to go right back into the glass cases, because my personal action figure I had on top of a shelf, and I guess over time of people slamming the front door, it fell off, and then the dogs got to it, and so that one's gone. So I've learned my lesson. Everything that I deem valuable will now go behind glass cases. That way, even if they fall, they ain't gonna go anywhere because it's in a glass case. They're just gonna fall down, and I'm just gonna pick them right back up.
Reminded me of my grandma's curio cabinet with all her haunted porcelain dolls from the 1800s.
Amy used to have a collection, and she still does. Her collection has not gotten any bigger because we stopped buying them. But she had like this clown collection for the longest time, and they were all weird looking clowns. Like, holy cow! But those are all packed away. Most of them are all packed away. But yeah, so that's all I got for you. I can sign this.
Almost as bad as my
Bobby's falling
haunted
asleep.
crystal skull.
What?
I said that's almost as bad as my haunted crystal skull that I had to put in a sealed container with holy water because they kept screwing around with the house.
No, I don't think we're on the same connection there. One's toys, one is fucking with your house and your life. Hey,
I got that on a reservation from an elder there that didn't want it anymore. And I thought his stories were BS, and they turned out not to be. I haven't laid eyes on that skull in over 3 years. It's been sitting in the box.
Well, they make movies about those objects, and normally they have them behind a locked door in a special case, so none of that shit goes on. Just keep that in mind.
Yeah, no, I didn't.
All right, gentlemen, that's all I got for this week. We're going to come up probably with some more matches the following couple weeks. Maybe do some play-by-play action because, again...
And a surprise we're going to have coming up, a surprise guest and match announcement.
A lot of different things are in the pipeline, and it's mainly due to SICW. We always take Christmas, the month of December off for Christmas and be with our families and everything. So, this will be the time that we throw in some other things into the mix. Special guests. We still got to, unfortunately, come up with Kowalski and Glenn Williams on the podcast. So some oddball things. We're going to have our promoter on, Herb Simmons, on one time because he's got some things he wants to talk about. So a lot of things in the future. But from everyone at Squared Ring, Nate, Bobby, me, thank you for tuning in. Please subscribe if you haven't, if this is the first time, and share it with your friends. It's just going to help us out, and we love it for you. Love you guys for it. So, all right, guys, have a good week. Please don't get off the air yet. I mean, you can cut off the air, but you guys have a good night.